Thank you so much to Brother Gilles for that beautiful violin playing. And hello from me, Philippa Blackham, and on behalf of all of us here at the Brahma Kumaris, a very warm welcome to Global Cooperation House and today's very special program, Facing the Challenges of Our Rapidly Changing World, Creating the Conditions for People and Planet to Thrive. Well, of course, before the pandemic, we had all of the events at Global Cooperation House, either here in the auditorium or in our conference room. And then during the pandemic, everything moved to Zoom and online. And now, post-pandemic, we have people here in person, which is absolutely wonderful, and we have people joining us online. So if you are one of those, a very warm welcome to you as well. Even though we can't see you, we feel your presence amongst us, and you're very much part of today's program and very welcome indeed. Well, today's event is a contribution from the Brahma Kumaris to the Climate Coalition's Great Big Green Week, which starts today. And it's going to be literally hundreds of events right throughout the country. I think last year's week, there were 5,000 events throughout the week. So by being here today, either in person or online, you're not just participating in this one event, but you're participating in this nationwide movement to get people thinking and acting in a way that is going to support our wishes and hopes for the environment. And the organisation calls this Great Big Green Week the UK's biggest ever celebration of community action to tackle climate change and protect nature. And all of us have, over the summer, seen how climate is changing. We're all aware of the impact it's having on the natural habitats. So it really is something that we are also keenly aware of, but maybe don't know necessarily what we can do to make a difference and to make our contribution. I saw it said on one of the programs for this week that we need to feel universal, think global, act local. Really holding the bigger picture right through to the grassroots and what I can do in my community. And we thought it would be a lovely idea to open the event with a few insights into what is happening locally. And I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Councillor Anton Georgiou, who is the leader of the Liberal Democrat group here in the London Borough of Brent. So Anton, if I could welcome you to our little stage just here, and if you could just share with us a few words and a few inspirations as to what is happening locally, that would be great.
My name's Anton. I'm the Liberal Democrat councillor for Alperton, which is in the Wembley part of Brent. And as of a few months ago, I'm also the leader of the Liberal Democrat group on Brent Council as well. But above all, I am an environmentalist, and I'm hugely worried about the future of our planet. There can be no denying that the climate has changed. We've just heard now about what took place over the summer months. We had record heat in the UK. We had potential for drought. We had wildfires in parts of London, and that's happening across the world, in Europe. And it's very clear now that it's no longer climate change. Climate has changed, and we all have a collective responsibility to do what we can to have an impact and make things better for our planet. There is a lot more that we can do individually, and collectively that will make a difference. So I just wanted to leave you with a couple of things that I thought you might consider doing or telling people about when you go back home. So why not consider taking a bike or walking somewhere rather than taking a short trip in a car? Commit to the 3 Rs. The 3 Rs are reduce, reuse, and recycle, which will cut down what we throw away and how much waste is put in landfill space. Use a recyclable or a reusable shopping bag when you go to the supermarket or the high street. Conserve water. Educate others about the climate emergency. This will be really key, because it's good to see everyone here, but there'll be lots of people out there who don't think about the climate in the way that we obviously do. So educate others and make sure they're also aware of how bad things are and can and will continue to be. I'll end by saying that we only have one planet, and for too long we've taken advantage of the incredible resources that it has to offer. We've forgotten that this is not our planet, it's one that we share with so many species. It's our duty to protect Earth as best as we can, for our own futures and for the futures of everyone that's going to come after us. We can all make a difference to secure the long-term health and well-being of our planet. So let's go and do it. Thank you and enjoy the discussions.
Thank you so much, Councillor Anton. It's always so inspiring to hear any politician talk about the environment, but to talk about the environment with that enthusiasm and wisdom really does give us a sense of hope, certainly for you lucky people living here in Brent. Well, before I introduce you to our speakers for today's conversation, we thought it would be good to set the scene with a project that is happening that I think you will be really pleased to know about if you don't already. It's a project that's taking place in Africa, and it's a movement to grow a living green wall. That's right, a wall made of trees, shrubs, crops, and other vegetations. It's going to be 8,000 kilometers long, and it's going to be a natural wonder of the world right across the entire width of Africa. It's running through the Sahel region, which is on the south side of the Sahara Desert, and it's going to be passing through some of the poorest places on the planet. Once it's complete, it's going to be the largest living structure on the planet, 3 times the size of the Great Barrier Reef. And it will be a symbol that humanity can overcome its greatest challenges. So it starts in Senegal on the west coast, passes through Mali, Sudan, Eritrea, and ending up in Djibouti on the east coast. So a magnificent project, and one which really demonstrates one of our key themes for this afternoon, which is facing the challenges of our rapidly changing world. The Brahma Kumaris Environment Initiative in Africa is supporting this project with a spiritual approach. And their aim is to empower people who are working on this great green wall, empowering them with inner qualities of peace and of personal and collective resilience. The aim, from their perspective, is to shower pure thoughts and good wishes for the success of the project. And they say that thoughts, like words, carry power. In their words, they say, through our thoughts, we can love, heal, protect, grow, and nurture our planet, growing a wall of hope against abject poverty for the people affected by drought and desertification. So let's hear a little more about the Great Green Wall from those people who are helping make it happen.
The Sahel region on the southern border of the Sahara Desert is on the front line of climate change. Global warming and over-farming are destroying healthy land, threatening the lives of millions of people. But we're fighting back with one of the most ambitious projects of our time. We're growing a line of trees and plants that will bring life back to the land and transform people's lives. We're growing food for the millions who go hungry every day. Growing a reason to stay for the families forced to migrate to Europe. Growing green jobs, giving real incomes and opportunities. Growing peace in places where conflict is widespread. Growing a response to climate change where temperatures are rising faster than anywhere else on Earth. We're growing an 8,000-kilometer green wall across the entire width of Africa. A symbol of hope that humanity can overcome its greatest threats. We're growing a world wonder. the Great Green Wall.
The Sahel. Across the Sahel, communities are rehabilitating ecosystems to improve access and availability of nutritious food. The region is characterized by recurrent episodes of droughts, floods, and irregular rainfall patterns. The Sahel region in West Africa is home to 80 million people. 53% of the population live in a rural context and are dependent on two main sources of livelihood: agriculture and pastoralism. Both are mutually dependent on the ecosystems. WFP is working with communities, governments, and NGO partners to help rehabilitate land for present and future generations. Across the Sahel, 70,000 hectares of land can now be used by farming families to cultivate their crops and make a living, increasing the local production of fresh fruits and vegetables. Together, we are transforming the Sahel.
And going within, bringing my attention to myself, to my thoughts. I bring this awareness to Africa, to the Great Green Wall, and to the millions of people that will benefit from this beautiful project. We visualize communities of greatness, people in peace and prosperity, sharing their resources, regenerating the planet, regenerating the soil, water coming back to the villages, smiles, and an atmosphere of peace, cooperation, and hope. Hope for the planet, hope for the millions of people, knowing that the power of my conscience has the capacity to transform that which is now in degradation into something wonderful, prosperous, beautiful. When I change the vision that I have of myself, I can create the possibility to change a beautiful world that I know is possible within my heart, and to share this vision with others, to create hope for planet Earth and for all the community of life. These are the gifts of spirituality, the gifts of hope, peace, and cooperation.
This afternoon, I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce you to our speakers who are bringing their wisdom from their own specialities and coming from both background of science and the background of faith. In days gone by, we used to look for solutions to the people from faith, from mysticism, from mythology. And then, of course, science came along and everyone shifted their attention to scientific solutions. And we had the whole age of science. And I think now we're realizing that facing the scale of the problems that humanity is facing, we're only going to get anywhere if we can combine the wisdom from science with the wisdom from faith traditions and spirituality. And that's what we have on our stage here this afternoon. So let me just briefly introduce you to who we have. We have Canon Giles Goddard, who is the vicar of St. John's Church in Waterloo, which is in the Diocese of Southwark. And Giles has been there since 2009. He is the chair of the Faith for the Climate, which supports interfaith work on climate change. He's also a member of the Church of England's Environment Working Group, so great to have his expertise. And then delighted to say we have Dr. James Mayer with us, who is the Emeritus Professor of Marine Biology at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. And James has 40 years' experience of research and teaching, and he's been involved in many collaborative projects on marine biodiversity in various countries in Latin America. We have our sister here from Global Cooperation House, Sister Maureen, who is the Programme Director for the Brahma Kumaris in the UK, and is also the Brahma Kumaris representative at the United Nations in Vienna. And she was an active contributor at COP26 and is now busy making plans for COP27 in Egypt. And then finally, we have Dr. Thomas Brun, who is a physicist and a research group leader for the transdisciplinary research group called Transformative Spaces and Mindsets. And he's working at the Institute of Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam, which is on the border of Berlin in Germany. So that is our lineup for this afternoon. I'm sure you'll agree with me. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be gaining some of the insights, some of the pearls of wisdom that they have accumulated between them over a good number of years. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speakers for this afternoon. So Tom, you have very kindly flown in especially from Berlin to be with us this afternoon. So huge thanks to you for that. And you've had quite an interesting time walking parts of London since you've been here. And just briefly, some of the work that you've been looking into is the link between mindfulness and sustainability, which is one of the things you may be talking to us about later. Just in a nutshell, what is that link?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Philippa, and welcome to everyone who's joining. To put that in a nutshell, I think it's about that issue of cooperation that came up both in the video and also before. We have so many beautiful insights, but I was suffering from witnessing people not really connecting with each other. And the emphasis on mindfulness is my approach as a scientist, strangely, to help people from different perspectives look at problems together and find a way to really relate and then contribute their different capacities to address these problems.
That's great. So it's really joined up thinking and people not just staying in their own little discipline, but working together. We'll look forward to hearing more about that later. Maureen, of course, you're very involved with the climate change conferences for a good number of years now. And you're going to be talking to us in a moment about the link between consciousness and how a shift in consciousness can bring about a change in our attitude towards the environment. Do you feel that's a message that is beginning to get across now?
Starting to get across, yes, I would say, because I've actually just been a couple of years involved in the conferences themselves. But when we first spoke of this connection of consciousness and climate change in Copenhagen in 2009, people felt it was very strange. They just couldn't relate to it. But now people do listen and they want to understand. So there is something of a breakthrough there, yes.
It only needs a certain number of people to make that shift, to see a shift happen in the world. Now, James, you're going to be talking to us about your expertise as a marine biologist. And I think for many of us, because we live on the land, we tend to focus on issues relating to the land. But of course, the sea is 70% of the Earth's surface. And you have that perspective that goes beneath the water, and you're going to be talking to us about that. But how can we get more involved in doing things for the seas and oceans if people want to feel more involved in that?
I think it's a question of education, and there's terrific documentaries around that people are more aware of life underwater now, whereas marine biologists or divers who go underwater get a real feel for the environment and the issues and the problems there, whereas the general public just see the ocean or the sea as the surface. So, but I think educating students and the general public, and especially these documentaries, have raised awareness a lot of the problems and the potential solutions.
Well, you'll be taking us underneath the surface of the ocean in just a few moments, so that's going to be great. I will just say at this point that we are going to be inviting questions from the audience, both the audience here in person and online. So if you hear anything that you would like to come back at and ask a question, do be holding that question in your mind. But Canon Giles, we're going to begin with you. And I know that you've had a book out called Space for Grace, which is about creating inclusive churches. And I wonder if you feel whether the environment is one of those issues that everyone can get behind. We can put our differences to one side and feel part of something together. It's a really inclusive, bringing together of people theme.
We all face a crisis, and if we don't work together, then we won't be able to solve the crisis. So not only is it a creative thing for us to work together, but it's also it's necessary, it's essential, I think. Yeah. So inclusion becomes a kind of necessity.
Out of necessity. Well, you're going to kick us off this afternoon, and you're quite involved, as I said, with Faith for the Climate and also the Great Big Green Week. So I'd like to invite you to share with us some of the thoughts that you are going to share.
Thank you so much, and it's very good to be here again. I was here a few weeks ago for the Talanoa Dialogue, and it's good to be able to carry on these conversations, and I really take my hat off to the work that the Brahma Kumaris have been doing over so many years on climate. I think you qualify as early adopters of the issue, and also making the connection between spirituality and climate, which is so crucial, I think, for all of us. And it was good to see some Brahma Kumari members at the Loss and Damage Action Day that we had earlier this week, where we went on a walk of witness from St. John's, my church in Waterloo, via the Shell Centre to Parliament Square, where we prayed and held witness for the very large parts of the planet who are suffering disproportionately as a result of climate change. I'll come back to that in a moment. But I also want to say that it's very, very good to be on the panel with scientists. The more I understand about science, and I do, like all of us, or many of us, I read a bit of science in my spare time, so I'm one of those amateurs that doesn't really know anything, but kind of wants to. But what's become increasingly clear is that, the more we get the way that science seems to be working, and the way that faith seems to be working, there's a kind of deep connectivity between us. In fact, it reminds me rather of the Middle Ages, where theology was the queen of the sciences and everything, all knowledge kind of tended towards God. And we kind of lost that a few centuries ago, and it feels as though it's coming back for those of us with a faith that, the profound and awesome structures that we're uncovering through science, both biologically and physically and chemically, connect with the awesomeness of the creation and the creator. So it's very good to bring those together. So as you mentioned, I set up Faith for the Climate, which is a charity which specifically brings together different faith traditions in order to work on climate. And I set that up back in 2014. I got roped into climate work really by a young activist, a 19-year-old activist who challenged me when I was at St. John's. I'd been at St. John's for about a year. And we got some sponsorship from Shell for our local festival. We got £1,000 from Shell. And this 19-year-old activist came and talked to me and said to me, "Why are we taking money from Shell?" And I said, "Well, why shouldn't we? They're a local business and they've got money and we want money, so why not?" And then she kind of, this was back in 2009 and 10, and I wasn't fully aware. I was beginning to be aware of climate change, but wasn't fully aware of the connections. And she said to me, she explained all that we now know very well. And as a result of that, I began to be much more active in climate. So I often tell that story as a way of saying that activism does work, even if sometimes you feel you're not making a difference, you are. And that 19-year-old, Siobhan, in some senses what she did led on to my involvement, which led on to the Church of England changing its approach to climate, because I was quite involved in that, and also led on to the setting up of Faith for the Climate, which I did because when I began to become more active in climate, I realized there was nowhere where different faith traditions could come together. And as you said just now, it's absolutely crucial. It is a no-brainer that faith traditions can share this vital aspect of our work. And together we are stronger than individually. And so what we've done over the past few years is we've, in the run-up to COP21, feels like a long time ago, COP21, that was the big conference in Paris back in 2015. We organised something called the Pilgrimage to Paris, which was a group of about 40 or 50 people who walked from London to Paris. And then we worked alongside, there were various other pilgrimages which came from around the world. We worked with them. And I know, because Christiana Figueres, who was the General Secretary at the time, said that the contribution of faith traditions was really crucial in the Paris discussions back in 2015. And so we were pleased with that. And then come COP26 last year in Glasgow, we brought together something called the Make COP Count Coalition. Again, the Brahma Kumaris were part of that and various other people. And we went up to Glasgow and again, we amplified the faith voice. And in particular, we made the connections between faith and climate and justice and talked about climate justice in a very clear way, which perhaps doesn't always get to the forefront of the climate debate. And again, we've been told that the work that we did on loss and damage made a difference, certainly to the British government, to the UK government, and to the work of Alok Sharma, who, as you probably know, was the minister in charge of the talks on, well, he was the president of COP26, and he's continued to be for this year. And the way in which the loss and damage was raised as an issue affected the way in which he carried forward his negotiations. So there is evidence that faith voices make a difference in these conversations if we can do it properly. So in terms of making, what's the title of this? Creating conditions for everyone to thrive. There are some individual actions that we can do. In many senses, we know what they are. St. John's, my church, is just reaching the end of a renovation. And as part of the renovation, we've made the building net zero. So we've put solar panels on the roof and we've taken various passive measures in order to reduce heat loss. So there are a number of other things that we've done so that now we're not contributing anything in terms of greenhouse gases into the climate. We are still using gas heating because it was too expensive to put in an air source heat pump, but we're offsetting that little bit of gas that we're using. So we're operationally net zero. Our congregation is very active in kind of taking some of the steps that Anton mentioned earlier. I came up on a bike from Waterloo, which was good. I like coming here because it's all uphill, so I feel healthy and worthy at the end of it. But it's nice and easy going back home as well, which is great. But certainly members of the congregation are increasingly involved in taking action. But I think what we're really trying to do, or what I'm trying to do, is to connect climate with justice, as I've mentioned. Because I think people don't always understand that, one of the fundamental things about climate change is that the people who've caused it, the people in the West, are causing disproportionate suffering to the global South. We've been hearing about the floods in Pakistan recently. It is, my mind completely, I'm less speechless really, as you can hear, about the fact that a third of the country was underwater, still is underwater, and the level of damage which has happened in Pakistan. I also heard about the Sundarbans in India recently and the way in which that is being affected by climate change at the moment. There's enormous challenges and people are really struggling and really suffering as a result, direct result now. And the science is quite clear that it's because of the greenhouse gases which were put into the atmosphere by the rich West, basically. I think Pakistan has contributed something like 0.5% of the global gases. Shell has contributed 2%. So one company has produced more than 4 times as much as the whole of Pakistan. And then, of course, you have to, I think it's important to have these kind of analyses and make the connection with colonialism and post-colonialism and the way in which, the natural resources, particularly of those parts of the world, have been exploited, and the way in which the carbon and the oil and gas have been taken and exploited, and the way in which, nations have been effectively pillaged for their goods, and the way in which capitalism has flourished on the basis of cheap energy. I mean, for about 200 or 300 years, it flourished on the basis of the cheap energy of slaves, and then slavery was made illegal. And conveniently, at about the same time, fossil fuels began to be used, and people realized that you didn't really need people. You could use coal, which was, you could get coal out of the ground, and you could use that to get cheap energy. And then coal gave way to oil, and now oil is giving way to gas. And the way that the economy works, we require that, and we've become addicted to money and we've become addicted to fossil fuels. And we see it in the way that this, and I'm going to say this terrible new government that we've got is already behaving. It's deeply, deeply depressing and deeply shocking that Jacob Rees-Mogg can say that he wants to get every cubic centimetre of gas out of the North Sea and enabling fracking. I mean, it is deeply depressing. And I think, we need urgently to take action. We need our voices to be heard. And I'm not being party political really about this, because this is about justice, it's about fairness. I'd be saying this about any party. But, sorry, don't get me started, but it is really important that we do recognize that we're facing a bleak future with this group of people in the cabinet and in number 10. When we were planning this talk, it was a few days ago, it was before the Queen's funeral, and we were also looking at the implications of the change of monarchy, and we were recognizing that Prince Charles, who's now King Charles, he won't be able to speak as much now, as he said himself, but he did say that he's encouraged that his work will be carried on by other people, and in a sense, we are those other people, those of us in this room. We're carrying on those things which he had so passionately embraced from, a long time ago, and experienced, a lot of criticism for doing it initially. But now that's come over to us. Because justice is the outworking of love. And Martin Luther King said that, and I often think justice is the outworking of love. And if we are to love the world which we're given care of, and if we're to love the people who are part of the world, it's up to us to act in a way which is just, so that everyone can flourish and everyone can thrive. And in the end, it is about relationship, which brings me back to Faith for the Climate, because Faith for the Climate is a way of building relationships between faith traditions and building relationships across faith, and showing that the differences that are becoming increasingly less, I think. I mean, there are some very real political challenges between faiths, but the more I get engaged in interfaith work, the more I see that the differences kind of fall away when we understand, that at the heart of it all is love. And the more that we can build our relationships, the more effective we will be. And so we saw that in Loss and Damage Action Day on Thursday, when we walked together with Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Jews and Christians. It was organized by an organization called Go Dharmic, which is a Hindu organization, but Eco Dharma was there as well, which is Buddhist. And I love the fact that Eco Dharma is Buddhist and Go Dharmic is Hindu, so everything kind of comes together. We need just to acknowledge the importance of the love that we can have for one another, because together we can make a difference. And I just want to finish by mentioning prayer, because I think as a priest it would not be right to talk for 10 minutes and not mention prayer, because at the heart of all of this is prayer. Prayer does make a difference. Meditation makes a difference. It's that depth that we're working with, the depth that I mentioned in terms of science, but the depth in terms of kind of connecting with God and with one another. If we can do those sorts of things, then things will get better. There used to be a cartoon when the whole kind of climate denial thing was going on so much. There was a cartoon that I always liked of somebody talking in a situation like this with a big picture of the globe behind, and underneath was the caption, "Wouldn't it be funny if it was all a hoax and we'd made the world a better place for nothing?" So I kind of think that, it is that about making the world a better place. And we can do it individually, we can do it collectively, and we can do it structurally if we do it together. And that's why it's good to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for everything that you're doing and the awareness that you're bringing to so many through what you're doing. And it was actually quite uncomfortable hearing you talk about the way in which the South is being disproportionately affected, because we tend to think that we've left our colonial history in the past and that we don't do slavery anymore and we're now behaving with honor and integrity, but actually it's still going on, and that's very humbling to realize that we are witnessing this going on at this very moment. So if you have got questions for Canon Giles, do be thinking them up, and there will be a little opportunity for you to actually say a prayer at the end of our time together, so we'll look forward to that. But for now, many thanks indeed. We're going to move on now to the marine biology, the world of marine biology, which is the specialism of Professor James. And I'm going to ask those of us on the stage to just move our chairs a little, because James is actually going to show some slides. He thought it would be the best way to give us all a real experience of what he's talking about, to actually take us under the water.
And good afternoon to everybody that's here and attending online. First of all, I would like to thank Brahma Kumaris for inviting me onto this panel event, and I very much look forward to the discussion and question and answer sessions. So, ever since human beings have lived on Mother Earth, they've depended on the environment, and for thousands of years, they have used the resources of the environment to survive and thrive. Since the Industrial Revolution and the increase in human population, now reaching nearly 8 billion, and the corresponding economic development, I think apart from impacts being local or regional at most in the ancient times, there's understanding that it's global impacts that are affecting us now. Now, 60 years ago, in 1962, Rachel Carson produced a book called Silent Spring, and that was highlighting the impacts of pesticides on biodiversity in the environment. And then 30 years ago, in 1992, the United Nations developed, the previous slide, please, developed the Earth Summit, Rio Earth Summit, and that was the big countries and governments all getting together to develop strategies for tackling climate change and the massive loss of biodiversity occurring and understanding. The Convention on Biological Diversity had a lot of issues, a lot of agenda, and one of them was for governments to establish protected areas to conserve ecosystems and habitats, and that's been quite successful. And that's establishing areas to protect the biodiversity that is already there. But there's huge areas of the world that have got degraded. Back to the original slide. Not moving so quickly. In recent time, and this is the UN decade of ecosystem restoration. So there's understanding now that there's a lot of degraded areas which could be restored to pristine environments. And that's what I'll be talking about mainly. The next slide now, thank you. So in the marine environment, coastal and shallow water areas, there's a lot of restoration work already going on in damaged and degraded environments and habitats. Mangroves in the tropics, salt marshes in temperate regions, and seagrass meadows around the world in shallow waters. I'll be talking a bit more about native oyster beds, shellfish beds, and tropical coral reefs. So the next slide, please. And my examples, just short examples of two projects I'm involved in with colleagues at my university on native oyster bed restoration projects in Scotland and a tropical coral reef restoration in Malaysia. Next slide, please. So for native oyster beds, back in the early 1800s, there were huge beds, natural beds in the southern North Sea, the English Channel, and in coastal and estuarine areas around Britain and continental Europe, as well as in North America, Australia, and New Zealand. And so the idea now is to, these have all been fished out or destroyed by bottom trawling and dredging, so that these beds no longer exist. So the projects that we've been involved in are in Scotland on the Dornoch Firth, an area, it's actually a protected area, but it hasn't been designated protected area for oysters because they're not there now. But the idea is to restore these beds. And the other small project we're looking at is the Loch Ryan oyster fishery, a very small scale sustainable fishery. So, and that's part of the the Native Oyster Restoration Alliance, which is around Europe and North America. So in the Dornoch Environmental Enhancement Project, as it's called, the idea is to restore oyster beds there to where they were before. And to understand that, we had to look at the history and the fossil record of when the oyster beds were there. And in the Stone Age, human populations exploited these beds in a sustainable way, obviously for thousands of years. And the record there is in the shell middens that are left by them. Moving forward through the different years, in the 1800s, when industrial fishing started, there's a lot dredged from the Moray Firth. Where I live in Edinburgh, in the Firth of Forth, there were 30 million oysters per year dredged from the Firth of Forth. And that was a boom and bust industry. Boom because of the railway development allowed rapid transport of the oysters to markets in London and Paris. But that only lasted a few years, and now, since then, there's been no oysters, live oysters in the Firth of Forth or the Dornoch Firth. So that's where we are looking at trying to restore. Next slide, please. So native oyster beds, shellfish beds, have a lot of environmental and human advantages. The oysters filter out food and particles in the water, and that increases water clarity. Helps seagrass and other plants to thrive in the clearer waters. They provide nursery grounds for larval and juvenile fish species, which then migrate into offshore and the fisheries. There's oysters themselves, which could be, in certain cases, exploited in a sustainable way. But the other aspect, for the human cultural aspect, they're important to coastal communities, as they were in the past, in Stone Age times they can be now, and they improve water quality. Next slide, please. So this project in the Dornoch Firth is actually funded by the Glenmorangie Whisky Distillery Company, and they have a long-term vision for their local environment. It's good corporate and environmental issues for them. And it's quite a lot, it's partners with us as Heriot-Watt University and the Marine Conservation Society. And the Glenmorangie get something out of it because they get good publicity, and they've produced a lot of media interest from CNN, Forbes, BBC and Sky. The next slide, please. So an important aspect of doing this work, apart from the science and the interest that we have in it, is public awareness. And getting together in an academic, Royal Society of Edinburgh held meetings of the Native Oyster Restoration Alliance, and that was sharing interests and experiences so that we learn from each other. And the next slide, please. So just very briefly, we mentioned also there's a sustainable oyster fishery in Loch Ryan. It's a small-scale thing that's been going on for decades now, a one-boat operation which dredges out patches of oysters from small patches of the loch, then leaves that patch for 6 years to recover, moving on the next year to another patch. So it's a sort of rotation basis, and it has proved sustainable. But it's also useful for us to study that to see how degraded habitat after dredging can slowly recover to full biodiversity and exploitable resources. Next slide, please. So the other example, very brief example I want to mention, that we work with Terengganu University in Malaysia, which have a beautiful research station in an island called Bedong, right on the coral reef area. And they take students from their students and our students to teach them about tropical systems. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, 2 or 3 years ago, there was quite a big tropical storm in that region, which destroyed and there was a big loss of coral reefs in parts of that area. So the idea that then developed by the colleagues there decided to try and encourage restoration at a quicker pace than it would take place naturally. Next slide, please. So what that involves is researchers and the students get involved so they understand what's happening, of taking small fragments of healthy coral from somewhere else close by, putting them on stakes and rods in that degraded area, and eventually culturing these. They grow very quickly, and students are involved, and then eventually you get the larger growth of these coral reefs. Next slide, please. And so the concept is, and it's been proved in different areas around the world, that these will grow and eventually look like a restored reef much more quickly than it would take place if it was left to nature to take its time. Next slide, please. So Terengganu University do appreciate the work a lot with the researchers and their students, our students, and the local community. So they have community involvement, public marine awareness, which is very important, the education of the public to understand the importance of these habitats that can be restored if they are damaged. Next slide, please. So just to finally summarize things, it's obviously important for international agreements such as the Climate Change and Biodiversity Convention, governments and to really tackle climate change and biodiversity loss. But as Councillor Anton mentioned, again, individual actions are really important as well. And these are just small projects around that I've been involved in, but they're replicated in many parts of the world. And I thought the quote on the flyer for this event by Howard Zinn was very appropriate in saying, small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. And I think that is very, very true in what we're talking about at the moment. So thank you.
Sister Maureen, in a way we've had two examples, the Great Green Wall in Africa, but now these examples of projects in Malaysia and in Scotland, that, you know, if you hold a vision for change, you can make change happen. And of course, the Brahma Kumaris came into existence as a result of a vision of a transformed world. And the idea was that the way we get from where we are now to that vision of a transformed world is through transformation of our own consciousness. And that is the key that unlocks the potential that will make change happen. So I'm very keen to hear your perspective on climate change and consciousness.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello? Okay. Thank you for opening with that, and thank you for what you've both shared, because you know, it really makes that connection between, as you say, holding the vision, but also I can feel, James, that the projects that you've been doing, they've been done with a lot of love. You know, it's not just a research project, it's something that you've really put your heart into, and I think that makes all the difference as well. And I do feel that nature itself feels that and responds. So this is another dynamic. And in fact, I was going to make this quote later on, but I feel I'm a little too close to the mic. But I'll make it now, and it is from then Prince of Wales, now His Majesty the King. And it's from a book that he wrote in 2010 called Harmony. And It's where a new way of looking at the world. And it's where he set out his vision or his world view. And it's a very fascinating book. But I will just start with this one quote from it. Oh dear. I think the mic's not quite. I put it further away, be better. We have lost ancient wisdom when we practice great humility and achieve mastery over the ego. Then we can have an understanding of the mind of God, and wisdom is revealed to us. I really felt that was such a profound thing to say, because it's really showing us a path of where we need to go to be able to really implement change on a very vast scale. And part of what we're asked to do, it mentions, give you a vision of how a flourishing world could be. And at first I thought, well, if I look around me and see what's happening, I would say I don't have a vision when you just look at it like that. But then I know that if I, and I'm sure this is the same for all of you, if I reflect within, if I maybe am meditating, praying, it's like a hope can emerge from within you that it is possible to make a change. It's possible for a better world, a flourishing world. And I think this hope arises from what's really within us at a deeper level, our inner goodness that we all share, unconditional love that we do have. When we go within, it's there for us, and a capacity to understand a way of relating to people around me and to the planet in a respectful and a non-violent way. Many of you will know this term, ahimsa, non-violence. It actually means not causing any kind of harm in any way. And so I really feel that without an inner change of consciousness, our collective way of exploitation, of unsustainable growth, if we don't have that change of consciousness, this will just lead us down a very destructive path. I'd like to quote from Johan Rockström, who I'm sure you know well, who's the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And he said that the Earth is on course to cross multiple dangerous tipping points that will be disastrous for people across the world. And I just thought I'd explain the tipping point. When a temperature threshold is passed, leading to unstoppable change in a climate system, even if global heating ends. And it's typically a small change that has a huge impact and changes the state or the fate of a system and takes it in an irreversible direction. And then the image that came to my mind was, of the final snowflake that makes the branch fall, the tiny act. And so I thought, well, we can see these tipping points happen externally, but how close are we to triggering the tipping points in our consciousness that will also lead to irreversible change, but in a very positive way? Can we change that course of destiny towards a flourishing world? And I do think that those of us, many who are involved in climate action across the world, I do feel that we are changing that course of destiny. And it may be hard to believe it because what gives rise or what builds up to a tipping point isn't always visible. And so when we consider the shift in consciousness that leads to a more sustainable future, it's an inner change that can have an expression in many different ways. But when we see the result of change, we don't always identify the causal factors beneath that. And I think this is where science and spirituality or faith really come together, because we are spiritual beings, but we're interacting intimately with the physical world, our bodies, people around us, every element of nature. But I think the question is, what is primary? Is the external exploitation of matter primary, or is consciousness primary? And I do feel that only when we make consciousness primary can a shift to a sustainable future take place. And in a series of dialogues we were holding a few years back, the question was asked, or in a sense a statement, it's not so much what shall we do, but the question more is, how shall we be? And I think this is about returning to the indigenous worldview, where human beings have a symbiotic relationship with the earth of respect and love. And only with that sort of consciousness can we then take the decisions and make the policies that consider the bigger picture of what is happening, the connection between consciousness, values, decision-making, action, but also the connection between climate, poverty, social justice, war, and the displacement of people. It's all intimately connected. And yes, they're making reference to the king in his book. In the introduction, he says, "The earth's alarm bells are now ringing loudly, and so we cannot go on endlessly prevaricating by finding one skeptical excuse after another, avoiding the need for the human race to act in a more environmentally benign way," which really means one thing: putting nature back at the heart of our considerations. But that's only the start of it. We must go further. Right action cannot happen without right thinking, and in that simple truth lies the deeper purpose of this book. And although it was written in 2010, I don't feel it's at all outdated in its thinking. And so, yes, the whole understanding that our spiritual dimension of our existence has been put to one side. And when we lose touch with our inner feelings, we lose touch with our inner guidance. And, many may believe that science holds the whole picture, but it doesn't, as I think we all know. And it doesn't address necessarily the inner dimension and the deeper meaning of life. There are several powers working in the world, many. The power of religion, which is a lot in a devotional form and often in a political form now, unfortunately. Of course, politics and science. But we really need within that the power of inner silence, the power of spirituality, the power of love, the power of our original state of being, because I feel this is where transformation and regeneration really begins. Just another quote from Harmony, the book. "The problem is not in an absence of knowledge, but in the absence of relationship. No one individual can grow true and well without relating to the well-being of the whole." And again, we've lost that connection in many ways. There's a vast difference when we act with wisdom, with love, with an expanded and deeper awareness, with a connection with God, with a motivation of benevolence for all, not just for one particular group of people. And the effect of that action is very profound and far-reaching. Conquering one's ego, quite a task, right? I'm sure we're all on the journey, work in progress, one of my favourite phrases. But really you can see it's human ego and then the fear that results from that, which is really devastating our world at the moment. And so it's so important to take care of our inner life, and because otherwise there are too many influences that can take us in different directions which are not productive and which are harmful. I think really our main task as a human species is to return to that inner awareness and allow it to guide us. And to be aware that we can all make a difference, even in the smallest things that we do, to contribute to this tipping point of consciousness, which I really hope is not very far away from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Maureen. You really set out a lovely vision of, in a way, having been on a journey from having this innate wisdom often expressed through our indigenous peoples, that we then came along with our egos and Western mindset and exploited. And now we're coming full circle to a point where we're being given some sharp lessons that are making us look again at the wisdom of what has gone before and what is innately in all of us. So a beautiful thought for us to hold. So many thanks indeed. So last but by no means least, Dr. Thomas Brun from Potsdam. I don't know if there's something in the water in Potsdam, but so many of the great environmentalists that I hear about these days come from Potsdam. Maybe it's your Advanced Institute of Sustainable Studies that is responsible, I don't know. But you are a lovely blend of, obviously you're a physicist, but you also have a real spirituality and natural mysticism almost about you, and you're combining your interest in both of these things to come up with some solutions which would be great to hear. So Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Philippa. Solutions. Now you've added a word to my chaotic cloud of notes that I took while listening. First of all, I just feel, you all have been sitting here for more than 1 hour listening to several perspectives already. Just like me, I'm sure your minds are very stimulated by the different perspectives we've heard. And those of us joining us online, they can at least get up in between and move around a little bit or do some yoga to stay active and connected. But I noticed that for me, these various aspects that have been mentioned are still, trying to make sense together. Still, I want to try to weave a few thoughts into what has been said already. And probably I will be mainly speaking about letting go. And in a way, that's a bit of a contrast to the solutions that you mentioned. Although I must admit, I'm very tempted to talk with you, Maureen, about what's primary and the absence of relationships, but we will get to that. But maybe I start differently. I somehow want to start a bit with the physicist in me, you could say, Philippa, because in my own way of looking at sustainability and the environment, there has been an important shift a couple of years ago when I was sitting in a cafe with a systems scientist, David Manuel Navarrete from Arizona. And I guess after 2 or 3 hours at some point, he said, wait, Tom, as long as you talk about the system, I feel you didn't really get it. You are the system. And I was listening and said, okay, yeah, sure, I am the system. And he said, yeah, but what that means is you cannot talk about the system as if it was separate from you. Anything you reflect about the system is a representation of your presence in that system, as part of that system. And I would say that's very uncomfortable, so to say, because what connects us here is the concern about the state of the system that we are part of. Because it has grown into a state that we feel, whoa, it's challenging its very own existence, so to say. We are talking about threats, are worried about the well-being of human life, of non-human life, etc., and of maybe the civilizational concept of the last couple hundred years, etc. So, as I'm sitting here, I am a child of that civilizational system. And it's tricky for me to reflect about it, and at the same time, my very way of thinking about it is a representation of that. I can't escape that, so to say. And I'm always sitting with that tension, because you mentioned the word solutions. I'm working with people, often like decision makers from different parts of society, who want to address environmental issues, not only climate change, but the way how the different challenges our world is facing, how they are connected. And I'm often witnessing how the way we have made sense of the problem influences the way we try to respond. And that gets me in a difficult situation. You know, how should I get rid of that? How can I transcend my mode of responding? Or how can I transcend the logic of that system that has brought about the unsustainability of the current situation before responding? Some people say that Einstein said that term of like, you cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. But that puts me in that uncomfortable center of I am the system. My way of looking at the system, I'm embodying the very problem, so to say. The way how we are sitting here, we are manifesting everything that we talk about. So, I wanted to talk about letting go. And letting go of what? Letting go, when I think of myself and our collective system that we are part of, I wonder what are the patterns of relationality that has brought up the current state that is manifesting in a civilizational context. Because systems change is not about like moving a macroscopic thing from here to here. We cannot change the environment or the earth or our society, etc. But a system is a manifestation of a dominant relationship culture. And if we reflect upon what are the dominant patterns of relationships in the society that we grew up in, there is a lot of discussion about how this manifestation is the result of so-called instrumental relationality. And instrumental relationality means that humans, and with each other, but also with themselves or with non-human life, relate in a functional way, like we exchange utility, essentially. I'm not relating to the forest as an intrinsically valuable manifestation of nature, but as a human, I relate to it in terms of how useful is it for me. And this is not something specific about you and me in this situation, but it's about the pattern of relationality across the system we are part of. You could see like many activists for climate change, for example, are running into a burnout situation because they turn themselves into a function for responding to that challenge we are facing. And so often, also myself, I'm reproducing that pattern. I'm reproducing that relationship pattern. Letting go of that pattern, however, is really, and that's the bridge for me to consciousness, is really challenging the way how I might identify as a human being, how I may have grown up in this system. And when we talk about conditions for people and planet to thrive, I feel it has a lot to do with understanding what we are currently witnessing is not a thriving of a civilization, but it is kind of the accumulated wealth of an extractive system. And that has a lot of benefits for us in many ways, you could say. I think that we are sitting here have experienced a lot of the benefits of that mode of civilization. And at the same time, it cannot be the response for the future. because then we just continue extracting. So it's about letting go of that mode. And now it's about deeper, looking at what is behind that mode. And for me, that I'm sitting a lot with the issue of existential fear. Like you were bringing in the topic of absence of relationship. And my work is very much about helping people to relate with each other. I mentioned that in the very beginning. And I'm often suffering from the distance that I experience between people. People meet even they want to talk about the same topic. Often people meet each other as representatives of certain institutions or roles. And then I have like 20 wonderful individuals in the room, and they have lots of capacities, etc. But what they are not is a relational field. They are not a system that could thrive. So I feel, what is it that enables us to move from the accumulation of individuals towards being a relational field? And in practice, I would often say in those situations, it's fear, it's anxiety. It's like saying, okay, I don't know who the others are. Yeah, oh, he comes from a big company and this is a politician with probably lots of influence, so I have to show who I am, and act out certain roles that are assumed to be the basis of how to relate. And that's a manifestation of exactly that paradigm that I grew up in, so to say. So taking it seriously was what David Manuel Navarrete said to me. I am the system, means also asking, okay, am I afraid in that situation? What prevents me from really relating and really being a field, learning to feel as representation of that field? And that we could talk about what vulnerability that involves, to leave that comfort zone behind, etc. But so creating conditions to thrive for me has a lot to do with settings that are safe enough so that people can get in touch, not individual plus individual and then try to relate, and make a new kind of functional exchange agreement, so to say, but get in touch, everyone with each other, and then say, okay, let's become a field, and then is where I would say the magic happens, and let go. Not I am pushing my agenda into this or that, but we trust that there is a shared purpose why we're here, and that needs to be explored as part of this building trust, etc. But then the magic is really about not doing it, not making it. You cannot make a system thrive. I'm a system. I cannot make myself thrive. But I can create conditions where I feel safe enough to let go into that thriving process that is intrinsic to aliveness, you could say. Oh yeah, I somehow wanted to get to that point. It must be somewhere here in the notes. that thriving is something that is it's built into evolution itself. It's not something that we have to make or create out of nothing. But I feel it's really about learning to be nature, so to say. I mean, in the European context, we for a long time distinguished between culture and nature. And fortunately, that kind of disconnect is gradually overcome, at least in our thinking. And at the same time, I feel it is something for us to really learn what that means to embody being nature, being a relational system. But that's also what gives me hope, because all that we are nature, and that's a process I can trust. And at the same time, of course, I'm sitting with the existential fear myself as an individual human being and as part of that civilizational system that is inevitably in crisis at the moment, clearly, and it's in danger. You mentioned the tipping points of the Earth system, etc. I mean, there's dawning news, so to say, and it triggers existential fear for myself, but also for us as a civilizational system. And let's face it, many people have stakes in the current system. And letting go of them is very discomforting. It has built identities, it has built career models, it has built institutional settings, etc. So I guess I want to encourage us to tap into that existential fear and sit with it and realize, but now I'm here, and deep in me is that inbuilt wisdom, what it means to be nature, to thrive. And look out for those with whom we can relate on a resonant basis, not on an instrumental basis, but where we see my sense of purpose, my sense of meaning resonates with you. And then let's build a container safe enough that we can see what wants to thrive here. My 10 minutes are up, and I'm sure I have missed many of the things that I wanted to say. Fortunately, there's still time to exchange. Let me have a look whether there's something very important I wanted to say. Oh, of course. Of course. I didn't mention love. I'm so glad you brought it up, Giles. Because everything that I just talked about, for me, also brings up the question, to what extent am I able to love? I was very much influenced by Erich Fromm. I'm not sure how you're nodding, you're familiar with him. He's had such an impact on me, and I love that he understands love not as something between you and me, but as a quality of being that I hold with myself, with other humans, and ultimately with the whole reality, with the whole world. So I invited us to tap into exposing ourselves to the existential fear. I'm also inviting us to tap into the question, can I love this planet in its current state? This civilization in its current flawed state, with all its heritage that has caused violence and suffering and etc. Somehow that's what I'm sitting with. I want to include that in my love. Otherwise, I feel it cannot be part of the transformation we are part of. Yeah, there's more to be said, but I stop here. Thanks for giving me the space to speak.
I love the idea that the opposite of fear is love, which you touched on there. But the sense I had when you were speaking was a realization of the extent to which we are all so connected, more profoundly so than we can ever know. And you talking about the fact that we can't say there's something wrong with the system because we are part of the system. We're talking about ourselves. And that by letting go of our kind of ego identities, our ideas, we can come into a relational field where we can all join the same page and be together in love. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it boils down to love. And it's amazing to hear a physicist talk about love. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. We've had lively discussion here in the auditorium, and I'm hoping there are a few questions that will be coming in from the floor. I've certainly got questions coming into my phone here. Whilst we get the roving mic, and if anyone would like to be brave and get going, please put your hand up, and the microphone will hopefully come to you. And whilst you're doing that, let's just go to the first of our questions, which has come in online. How do you respond to people who are simply angry about what we are witnessing with climate change? It touches in a way, Tom, on what you were saying about people bringing their old ways of doing things into the climate discussion, and in a way we need a new way of doing things. Would you like to be the first to respond to that?
In principle, yes. I'm wondering, for me it would feel more natural to collect a few points first to get a sense what is generally in the air. But I can say something on...
Do you want to hear a couple of other questions?
Yeah,
or
I'd
maybe
be curious.
You can scoop them up together?
So that I'm not just responding to one person.
Fair enough.
But
Fair enough. How can you feel love when you can see the world as we know it slowly slipping away? What can you do when you feel overwhelmed and as if there is nothing you can personally do? Why do we have to go through such destructive processes in order to reach a place of awakening? That's probably enough questions for now.
Yeah.
Do we have our first question from the floor lined up? Yeah, lovely. We'll come to you in just one moment. Keep your question. Thank you. Is that enough for you, Tom?
Yeah, thanks
Okay.
a lot. And they are, of course, all connected.
Yeah, good.
Great. Let's start with the toughest one. Why do we have to go through this? I don't know. And I'm struggling with it. It seems to be part of the way how this reality evolves, as sad as it is to be part of that, and as painful as it is to go through it. But both from what I witness around me and also from my personal experience, I can just confirm, it seems to need these kinds of crises and pains. And in a way, that's also what gives me hope. Because if you, maybe what we are experiencing here is just the growth pain, not growth in terms of like the conventional understanding of growth, but the thriving pain to help us evolve into a more connected global form of consciousness as a civilization. And of course, I'm overwhelmed with that. Yeah, of course. If I wasn't overwhelmed, it wouldn't really be a crisis, right? And I totally understand that it makes people angry. It makes me angry as well. Yeah, it triggers a lot of frustration, and this state of being overwhelmed, is super uncomfortable. And people are differently, let's say, equipped to cope with that anger and to cope with that overwhelm for good reasons, biographical reasons, cultural backgrounds, or just where they grew up in family conditions, etc. So I feel it's the question, how much am I able to contain whatever is the emotional reaction or whatever reaction that people bring in response to the crisis and overwhelm that they face. And I'm a learner myself in it. There are some things that I can contain and others that I can't contain, including my own anger and overwhelm, etc. And we just talked yesterday about that situation at COP last year, where I wasn't able to contain the anger of a person. I was so grateful you were there and you could contain it. So, but just having that in mind, that this is a process of loving, I would say, the ability to contain myself and then expand that ability to contain to whoever is around me, to whoever I might be responsible for. And how to feel that love? In a way, you could say, maybe I don't have a choice. I mean, that's what I am at the moment. I am a human being with all its flaws, and that's the story I live. And is there any reasonable alternative than saying yes to that story? And that's what love is in the end for me. It's being with something and saying wholeheartedly yes to it. That's what it is. That's what it means to me to love. And but I mean, there have been so many times and situations when I wasn't able to say that yes. So I can't, and maybe it is again that ability to contain the struggle that is the source of growing into that love. Oh yeah, and then maybe there comes a good point to the end. And that is again about the existential fear. Like not, because it's overwhelming, not step out of it. Just sit with it and bear it and embrace it. As painful as it is, it's part of our human experience. And I would say, right all through that, there is a quality of love shining through that can be discovered.
Giles, Christianity is born witness to suffering. You've got a few years on us in terms of feeling the pain and feeling the love at the same time. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Tom's really said it very well. So if you'd like a job in the Church of England, you can have one. But I think I was thinking about counselling, actually, in the counselling process. You don't make progress if you go into counselling or if you go into therapy until you own the pain, until you acknowledge the pain, until you go. And sometimes you have to experience the pain and experience the anger in order to be able to become more fully the person that you are created to be. And I don't think it's just, Christianity kind of specializes in pain in a way, but you know, Buddhism very much talks about the reality of suffering. I think all the great religious traditions do, and you know, the way in which the Hindu deities are both often kind of dark and light, and combine that, Shiva and Kali and so on. So within all the traditions, there is, you know, you can't try and respond to the existential questions if you don't have a serious answer to the question of suffering. And the question of anger, really, because anger and suffering are so very closely linked. So I think we have to own it, but then we have to challenge our anger, channel our anger into action with hope. And I think the word hope is absolutely crucial in all of this. You know, I think if we, you know, the more we hear and the more we look at the way in which tipping points do appear to be alarmingly close, if not already crossed. If we give up hoping, then we become less ourselves as human beings, and the world becomes less itself, and you're on a spiral into downward, you know, a spiral into nothingness. So we have to hang on to hope, because that enables us to continue to look above the darkness and into the light.
Is there a way in which we can use the pain and the anger about what we're witnessing and turn it round into something creative and use it in a way as a fuel for calling us into action?
Oh, no, definitely. That's what I mean by channeling the anger.
Yeah.
Completely. But not allowing, somehow you have to not allow the anger to be what drives you, I think, because that can be very destructive, but you have to kind of take it and turn it and use it creatively. But acknowledge it, you know, there are many, I talked about slavery before. I think there are kind of similarities really between climate change and slavery in some ways, because both of them are, you know, so iniquitous, but it's the iniquity which perhaps drives us to want to change things.
Thank you for that. Let's come to Maureen next. Why do we have to witness this destruction? What's the purpose of that?
I think there's like a pattern that's happening of a sort of entropy that has to happen so that what really is not useful can fall away, and a new impulse can come up. And it's a question, I feel, of, I agree with what's been said very much, but I feel it's a question of having enough inner resources to be able to make a choice. Like Giles said, is it anger that's driving me, or is it love? Love in the wider sense that you described, Tom. You know, is it love that's driving me? And I think that when we're able to make that choice, then we would see the more generative and regenerative nature of love, and we would choose that. But I think we are witnessing something of the old really passing by now. And we have to rise to that challenge to move into the new.
And believe that it serves some purpose somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
James, do you want to chime in there?
Yes, I think all the points I've been noting, the words that the other panel members have been saying, and I can understand, and I think individually we're angry at times, and I think anger comes from fear of things, and the opposite of fear is, as we've said, is love. So, and that can be translated into hope. I think that if you can channel your anger into motivation to do something positive, and I come back to the quote that was on the flyer advertising this event, and that might give people more hope, that you don't feel completely hopeless or not able to do anything individually, but small acts, when multiplied by millions of people, can transform the world. So that gives you something positive to think, instead of just sitting back there and being fearful and angry and frustrated and not doing anything. At least if you do something small, and a lot of people do that, then there's transformation that can happen. But it's a difficult situation with all the problems in the world that you sometimes can't see the solutions, but there are there.
We're all sitting with that, aren't we?
Yeah.
Thank you all for your answers. If we could go to our first question. Thank you.
My question is, with engineering having provided all of the solutions to all of our problems, the only thing to do now is for you to choose them. So if you choose to ride a bike here, and well done you did, if you choose to not use fossil fuels, then you will have the other choice, which has always been available to you. What does the panel think?
I think it's a question of greater empowerment. I know I need to make more of those choices. I make a certain number, but I need to make more of those choices. And maybe, well, I can only speak for myself. I do travel in an aeroplane, but I made a commitment many years ago not to have any dairy products, and no meat, certainly. And I know that's a huge contribution. So it's a question of, I can only really answer personally at the right time, and the more information that I have, when I just feel compelled to make that choice. And then it's not even a choice, it's like, you have to. That's it. I think it's what I can say.
Guess human nature on the whole will try and hold on to its comforts, and it's a bit of a carrot and a bit of a stick to get us to shift. Giles?
I think there's something much more insidious going on here. I mean, because I think the idea of the personal responsibility for the climate change was an invention of the fossil fuel companies about 20 years ago. And they came up with this idea of carbon footprint. And that was a very clever thing to do, because then we now all have this conversation about, what we should be doing ourselves. And the system, the structures have remained unchanged. So one of the reasons that we're not making those choices is because significant amounts of lobbying and deceit have been taking place by the fossil fuel companies and those who share those interests. And also by governments, because nobody votes for less comfort, as you say. And of course, it's important that we take individual actions, but I think, there are things which could have made an enormous difference, like the way the Conservative Party, God rest its soul, brought to an end the solar subsidies in 2015, and therefore the amount of PV panels that were being put on the roofs of the UK crashed in number, immediately, just like that. So there are policy decisions which have been taken, particularly by the Conservatives, which have led it to become more difficult for people to make the choices, even if they wanted to. And I think we really need to acknowledge that, we all, of course, we all have personal responsibility, but actually, the reality is that it's the powers that are working against us.
And what was in it for the fossil fuel companies to try and make us feel personally culpable? Why did they do that?
Because that moves the blame away from what they're doing. Because they knew 40, 50 years ago about the reality of climate change and what would happen, but they didn't want to change. And so they found ways, very clever ways. We were talking about the documentary, Big Oil versus the World, which came out quite recently. It's on iPlayer. They knew what was happening, and they worked out that the best way to deal with it was to confuse things, either by saying climate change was a hoax for a long time, or by moving it away from what they were doing towards us. Sorry, but it's a reality.
So we've been played, and we are now sat here feeling guilty when maybe we weren't the ones all along that should have been taking the action.
I mean, I think we are all part of the system, as Tom reminded us. So we can't exculpate ourselves. Yeah. But the way that it's worked over the last 30, 40 years, it's become much more difficult to, the kind of changes which people could have made and, might have wanted to make, the way that things have worked, it's just become it's been made into a minority thing. And I think if it had been done differently, it could have been that we were all doing it much earlier.
Yes, I think it's very understandable, the helplessness that people feel, given the big corporations and the government sort of behaviours. But I think there's aspects of encouragement as well. For example, a news story this week, the owner, the paper billionaire owner of Patagonia, the outdoor equipment and clothing firm, is transferring his company completely to a trust, which all the profits, the non-reinvested profits, will be put to protecting the environment. And it's interesting, his quote was, I like quotes, if we have any hope of a thriving planet, and the thriving is the other word that we come across, much less a thriving business, 50 years from now, it is going to take all of us doing what we can with the resources we have. So if there's more of these big corporations tipping to that sort of thinking, then there is hope. But again, for governments and for stakeholders and companies, it's the individual that can do something at least to try and influence policy. But it is difficult for us to sort of be positive in these sort of environment.
But knowledge is power, isn't it? By knowing these things, you can then take appropriate action. Yeah. Thank you for those questions. Do we have another?
I
Yeah.
would
Tom?
really love to add a few remarks,
Yeah.
if I may. It's because this question, I mean, reaches to the heart of the tension that I'm holding, so to say. And it's really a deep thing. For a long time of my life, I have refused to make use of many of the options that society was offering me. And somehow I'm still a bit, you could even say, jealous on those, like some colleagues of mine who leave the academic system, etc., and they join an eco-village in Spain, or, you know, build up a really alternative form of living. I feel, should I? You know, it's, and for some time I was thinking, do I not have the courage to go that far? Like, because of course, like you say, Giles, I mean, there's conditioning also in me. Like I've grown up in a certain way of living. I'm not trained to live in the woods, to say, yeah, as much as I love nature. And but there is also a deeper question about how do I understand transformation? Because only over the last couple of years I have made a quite conscious choice to say, no, I engage with that system that I'm part of. Either leaving is no option. I feel I would take all my topics with me anyway. Just live them in a different context. But okay, but if I am part of that system, how can I, so to say, play these channels consciously? And of course, I was sitting with the invitation to come here for a moment. So, okay, I've never done this. I've never flown for being here for a day. Yeah, and 6 years ago I would never have done that. I feel like, and at the same time, it seems that there is a voice in me that is convinced that it is meaningful to engage in certain contexts that are only available through these channels at the moment. As soon as I have, you could say, the faith that this system is on a pathway that it doesn't need those things, then I can shut up and disengage, so to say, from many of these channels. But it is a continuous challenge. Should I? Should I not? Is it meaningful? Is it not meaningful? And I'm sure I'm going to go home and reflect on that and wonder, and maybe in half a year again I will reflect, was it a meaningful contribution to a process that seems contributing to that thriving we care about? And I would never take that as a given. And I'm aware there are many options that I'm not yet taking. I hope that it is part of connecting the pioneers that are already living different modes of thriving into the context that I'm still embedded in. And maybe to say that I feel also blessed and to have connections to a certain context, like that institute that I'm working at. Throwing it overboard and denying all the things that are offered to me also feels wrong. Which is not to say I have to jump on board of all the things that are mainstream at the civilization at the moment. But yeah, so it's a deep tension, and I'm sitting with it almost every day. It's uncomfortable. I hope it's meaningful to go through it. Yeah, and I hope it's meaningful to be here. Yeah.
It most certainly is, and I think we would all agree it was worth it, whatever you went through to be here. Yeah, definitely.
Who knows what the planet Earth has to say about it, you know? Let's find out.
Well, we need to come up with a technology where we can use magnetic forces coming from the earth so that we can travel and not use any fuels at all.
Maybe one
By
day we will feel
location,
connected without flying to each
anything,
other.
yeah. New science. Maureen, before we go to our next question, obviously this house here has been through huge process of greening the ways of functioning, and in a way they're small, but also they're significant.
Yeah, we have done various things, and Maria, the person who's organised today, she's very much been part of that. But yeah, we have our waste management system, recycling. We don't use plastic cups and plates. We use things that are biodegradable when we have a need for large gatherings. We have the cleaning products. That many of them are just very simple. You can use vinegar and water. You can use ionized water that can disinfect, which doesn't cost anything extra. What else do we do? Maria would know. You got the mic, yeah, you say a few more things.
We also recycle the kitchen oil, so used oil.
That's right.
For making biodiesel. And we recycle food as well. So all vegetable peelings and waste food is also recycled. And then, of course, all the plastic and cardboard and paper and all of that.
And what, sorry?
Paper.
But I have to say, it's been a very interesting process of education for our community here, and to get people on board. Just being open about that, because we all have lots of habits and things are convenient. But we've really been quite determined to go through that process of re-education. And I think that's very important. If you embark on something, to be determined to see it through and to sustain it as well.
And the Brahma Kumaris Environment Initiative has gone through this process with all the BK centres in the UK. And in India, they're now, all the Brahma Kumaris centres are using renewable energies.
That's right.
And that's huge.
We are actually, in India, we are one of the single biggest institutional users of solar energy. We have a solar power plant in Mount Abu, our headquarters, that can supply electricity for 25,000 people. One of the biggest solar cookers in the world, which can create meals for 16,000 people at a time. And most of our centres are equipped with solar energy, solar cookers, and in many parts of the world, in Australia, all the retreat centres there, very green. They use enzymes for cleaning, and the whole enzyme thing that they use, don't know all the details. We're actually, I've been speaking about consciousness, and that's where I wanted to focus. But in terms of practical projects, we've not just said, we'll sit and meditate and it'll all go away. We've said, put that love into action, do something that can really show the care for the earth. And we have a project at the moment to plant, how many? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of trees in India and also abroad.
Thank you.
We wanted just to broaden it out a little bit. The three of us had several questions actually, but the one we sort of chose was how you address developing countries, because they would say they're trying to lift the majority of the population in those countries, and these are the centres of population growth in the world really, out of poverty. And the model they look to and aspire to is really the Western capitalist model. They see the benefits that we have enjoyed. They probably don't see the disadvantages, perhaps, but they certainly see the benefits we've enjoyed from development over the past 200 years, say. And this is what they are aiming for. This is what they're aspiring to. So how do you address countries that look to our model to lift their populations out of poverty? And leading on from that, how do you persuade the wealthy developing countries, and I'm thinking here of the Arab states of the Gulf, that they need to consider much more carefully how they invest their wealth in order not to repeat the mistakes that we made and do the damage that we've done, because my observation is that this is where the real damage is being done in some developing countries.
Thank you for your question. Do you want to just say your name and where you're from?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. My name's Sylvia Ismail, and I'm from Egypt. And I might possibly sort of point to Egypt as quite a good model for that sort of observation.
Very, very good question, because we've all enjoyed this for, decades. Why should we deny that to developing countries? Maureen?
I just want to say something that it's a very interesting product of colonialism to export a culture and position it as something higher than the culture that you already have. And in that way, make people devalue their own culture and their own traditions. And I think that's what's at the root of this. And so it's still happening today. You know, the export of Western culture through that little television set, and now it's the internet and everything. So it's no longer a conquest by battle, but it's a conquest through the media. And so it is a huge turnaround that is needed. And so I do feel, I can think about India and the work that we've done in India and is happening in India. And there are groups of people in India who have certain lifestyles where they absolutely, that there's Bosnoi community, can't remember the exact, but where they have certain protocols where they keep their community sustainable wherever they're farming and living. And the yogic agriculture that we've done has helped farmers and helped their mental health. But I think it's underlying this, enabling people to again really value the traditions that they have and see that they can actually bring them greater happiness, greater welfare, maybe greater wealth. But wealth, I know I'm speaking a lot, but I remember somebody telling a story of he was in Ladakh and he was staying with a family, and the father of the family asked him about his family back home, and is your father wealthy? And he says, well, yes, okay, I suppose so. And then he asked him, does he own a house? Does he have any cattle? Does he have... No. And they had wealth in their way, and they considered themselves much more wealthy than the person who come from wherever, England, wherever it was. So it's really about how we value things and how we see things. So how do we shift that awareness and consciousness? I think that's the key.
But is that a message they're going to want to hear when actually what they want is all the luxuries that we've been enjoying? Jars?
I think various things. I think you can sum it all up in two words, which is educate women, because that changes societies really fundamentally. It's interesting that you talk about population growth. There's only one part of the world where population growth is still happening, which is sub-Saharan Africa. In virtually all of the rest of the world, the fertility rate is reducing, and so it's often below replacement rate now, so people are producing fewer children than they need. So although some people are living longer, so that's why the population for the moment is growing, but by 2050 it will start coming down across most of the world except in Africa, which is an interesting thing. And one of the reasons for that is that women have been educated in all sorts of different places, and so they don't have so many children because they want to do other things. So that's one way in kind of engaging with the developing world. Another thing is just to make sure that, to really encourage people to invest in renewables. I mean, Africa is a really good example of a continent where, there's ample natural energy. The sun beats down on Africa day after day after day. So, and there are some enormous solar energy projects there in the Sahara Desert, but there could be more. So there is a way in which you can get people out of poverty without necessarily burning fossil fuels. And there are some encouraging signs, both there and in many other countries, that people are moving in the right direction. So it's not a zero-sum game. You can get people out of poverty without necessarily making the mistakes that we've made.
Just do it in a different way. Tom?
A lot has been said, but I want to pick up on something that you said that's really sitting with me always. You said, how can we persuade? And I feel some pain always in this word persuade. I don't want to persuade anyone of anything because I feel it's assuming I know better. And even the whole framing of a developing country assumes something that I feel very uncomfortable with. The tricky thing is, and that's about the issue of the wealth, so to say, the so-called developed world is very outspoken about its achievements, so to say. But it's hiding the cost, the social cost. And I feel everything we, whoever we is in that situation, might need to do is be honest about, yes, that's what we've gained. Oh, and by the way, we have eroded social relationships. Oh, and by the way, we have massive issues with psychological problems, mental health issues. And so adapting our model, I feel I can say most probably about China, because that's what I feel related with, where I have some insights and connections. And maybe that will be a powerful signal to the world that a country, an empire, a culture has breathed in the civilizational model of the industrialized world, incredibly efficiently embodied it, and now it's a huge thing. How in China it's called Tangping, means lying flat, that the young generation feels totally meaningless and says we don't want to do anything anymore in this system. And many of them have become rich, but they refuse to take any role, position, whatever in that system. And particularly because I'm connected with psychotherapists, I witness how mental health is a super big issue now in China, condensed within just a few decades. Maybe that's the painful learning that will be a signal to the world, like, oops, this is, by the way, the cost of the industrialized civilizational model, which we have always been hiding, is my sense. Only showing the big, nice achievements, the fancy outside.
We are out of time, sadly, and we did want to just close with a few reflective moments together. So we haven't just been talking, but we've been putting our good energy out into the field as well. So if we could just invite you all to join us in our closing meditations, and I'm going to just invite each of our speakers to just say a few words, whether it be a prayer, meditation, or just a few words of inspiration, just to bring our time together to a close. We start with you, Giles, and work down. Is that all right?
So I have a prayer which was written by Pope Francis, who is a complete hero when it comes to work on climate and environment. It's a prayer for our earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with your peace that we may live as siblings, harming no one. God of the poor, help us to rescue and be in solidarity with the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen.
I would just like to say that I came across the teachings and the concepts of Brahma Kumaris about 10 years ago, and the teaching and the strategies they have really impacted my thinking about things. And I especially appreciate the environmental initiative that people in Brahma Kumaris, the organization, run. They're involved in discussions with the United Nations and the biodiversity and in climate change. So I would encourage anybody that isn't aware of the initiative there to look at it in more detail, because it really gives encouragement to everybody to think that you can use spirituality in a very practical way to solve some of these problems that we've been talking about. And I was very impressed in India, the Solar One power plant and all the solar energy used for cooking at the concept. So it's not only a spiritual organization, but it's very practical based as well. And that's what really impressed me.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important for us all to be reflective in our lives, so that we're not just doing and not being so conscious of what we're doing or what is driving us. So I'd just like us to reflect for a moment on our original state of peace and the unconditional love that we have within us, and our connection with the highest source of love, so that in everything we do, we bring that love, that energy, that wisdom into life, into the world. Thank you.
What could possibly be added at this point after 2.5 hours together? I maybe just want to invite you to join me in enjoying this very moment and sitting with this miracle that each of us is. Never knowing what exactly the story will become. So many supposedly terrible things ahead, terrible things behind, joyful things behind, joyful experiences ahead. I don't know, I enjoy the fact that I will never understand myself and this miracle of being alive. And I want to continue to trust that my story is somehow held as finite as it will be, and that it's gonna be a joyful, meaningful ride. Let's see where it takes us. Yeah. Thank you for sharing this moment with you, and thanks for being together.
And thank you for ending on that beautiful note that the story of humanity is being held. You know, we have to believe it's being held at levels that we can't necessarily see. Thanks to all our speakers. I'm sure you'll agree with me in saying what a rich time of sharing it has been, to Thomas Brun, to Maureen Goodman, to James Muir, and to Giles Goddard. Very, very many thanks indeed. And thanks as well to all of you for being here, either in person or online. Thank you as well for your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get around to all of them, but let the conversation keep going. And if you're inspired to be part of any more of the initiatives and projects happening under the Great Big Green Week, you can just look that up online, the Great Big Green Week, and it will give you a list of all the events happening right throughout the UK. And there are leaflets at the back as well on the Brahmakumaris Environment Initiative, and also the website number for future events happening here at Global Cooperation House in London. But for now, from all of us, take good care, enjoy the rest of Environment Week, and we look forward to seeing you back here again very soon. Good night and Om Shanti.